Convergence is a series dedicated to exploring the pivotal intersections of technology, business, and leadership. And today we're diving deep into a critical conversation about artificial intelligence. Now, while most of us are debating the powers of the algorithms, I think that they're actually missing the real story. And the real story is a profound crisis in leadership. And today, Faisal and I will be confronting why the old playbooks are failing and why AI demands a completely new breed of leader. One capable of navigating the complex, messy, and essential intersection of machine intelligence and human ingenuity. Faisal, you actually wrote an article on this, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I wrote an article on MIT Sloan Review with my co-authors, Professor Tom Davenport and Eric Nelson from CSEI. It's a derivative of my recent book, Transcend. And we argued that the leadership makeup, organizational makeup, is going to be significantly changed because of the various element that's coming to play, not just technology. To our surprise, it became very popular, and it's one of the most read articles so far on MIT Sloan Review. So we're very pleased to see that message is resonating. And what we argued, regardless whatever you call these type of role, is recognize that change needs to happen in C-suite.
And do you think that that is the reason why it was so popular? Do you think that people are actually understanding that there is a time for expansion and there's a time for expansion in leadership roles, that there's a need to expand the scope of existing C-suite titles and definitions and functions, and maybe also the expansion of the scope of existing tech leadership roles?
Yeah, it's not so much about what you think in terms of expansion of a role or adding a role. It's more of a skill set mix, right? And how you pull these things together. As appropriately we call our podcast Convergent, it's really a convergence of a lot of different things. The leadership needs to now understand that you are very much living in a hybrid world. Hybrid, I don't mean just in terms of working from home and working at your office. The definition of hybrid world has changed. And hybrid here is really the human resource and tech resource. The leadership is also in the context of system skills, but also human skills. Your customer and the market you're going after is also interacting in a hybrid mode, whereby they're interacting with human elements, but also digital elements. So the skill set of these roles are significantly going to be redefined and redesigned.
I mean, I certainly agree with you. And we're going to talk a little bit more in the conversation about this hybridity and what needs to be redefined. But let's go back to, so the article's core argument is that AI transformation is fundamentally, as you've motioned towards, this hybridity of cultural and organizational challenge. And it's not just a challenge that can be attributed to purely something that is technical. You've probably, and I know that I've seen it as well, been in the role of a chief operating officer and through the consultation of many organizations that are going through this movement themselves, and also questioning the actual impact of the technology. Why do you think that so many organizations really continue still nowadays to treat it first and foremost as a technology problem?
Look, I mean, if you look at the last 30 years of the digital transformation space, we had traditionally chief information officer or we had chief technology officer. We also seen a growth of chief innovation officer. As we have seen here and there, chief transformation officer. The argument we make is that we need a combined role that is very much grounded in technology, but very much focused on business and people. We call this a Chief Innovation and Transformation Officer, CITO, or whatever you want to call it. The reason is that every successful transformation, especially when it's AI driven, because AI has so much impact on culture, people, and how we work and how we will be going after market. It starts with focus on purpose and people, and that requires a philosophical and psychological and human, but also grounded in technology, right? Traditionally, CTOs have been grounded in technology from your own organizational role. And I know from running my companies, but also from working with the various companies and the government agencies, that CTOs are traditionally focused on technology enablement, technology portfolio management, and not necessarily focused on the psychological and philosophical element that comes along with these kind of major wholesale transformation that we're going after or looking at.
And one thing that I personally found interesting in reading the article, and I'm sure that many people who are listening and also that have read the article themselves, you give a lot of concrete examples as to where this has happened in real life. And again, we're trying to focus on the fact that leaders need to understand the complex human and organizational factors, which requires agility. It requires a focus on cultural change, personality dynamics, and emotional intelligence. The article cites failures at Zillow and Air Canada, and you forefront these with your co-authors as examples of leadership gap. Which resonates most with you as a clear illustration of risks of a purely technical approach to AI? Let's maybe talk about some of those, because I think it's good to go into the intrinsics of how people can identify that if it is a technical approach, first and foremost, these are the risks, and this is already displayed as happened in large organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at any of those examples, and there are many others, as you've seen some recent studies that shows that only 2 to 5% of organizations are really getting value out of technology, and more specifically AI. And we've seen this even in digital transformation in the last 30 years, because we get so much focused on technology. Both in Air Canada and Zillow's case, what you look at is that in Zillow's case, the models they've created was biased. As a result, the decisions and the valuation of the home they were pulling together is very much biased towards their own organization. When market recognized that, Zillow's market cap dropped significantly. And in Air Canada, it was not very sensitive. The chatbot they implemented was not very sensitive about the customer needs and the exception processing. Either one of those examples, it is a very much of a understanding of the market, understanding of the customer psychology, understanding of the process was the key to the failure, not necessarily that the technology implementation didn't work. Technology actually worked fine. So here comes the roles, because whoever was looking at implementing all of those really didn't connected the dot and made sure that the purpose and the process and the people in both internally and externally are really enabled with the technology. There's a disconnect. So that's really what we argued, that the role, whoever is going to drive this, because a CEO cannot drive this, because CEO has other things to do, right? So a dedicated role that combines all this skill set, that can orchestrate other member of the C-suite with the eye on innovation and transformation, that is people and process focus and impact focus, are the people who are going to be successful.
Completely agree. One thing that I see sort of warning bells in my own head, and I'm sure that a lot of people listening to the conversation may also have this question, and it's a little bit that goes into the CITO paradox. So the proposal in your article was this new formation of the role, the Chief Innovation and Transformation Officer. Now, many might see that this could also become a single point of failure, because it is positioned and presented as a solution to fragmented leadership. But then if you consolidate the responsibility for technology, ethics, and cultural change into one role, does the organization then risk creating a sort of convenient scapegoat when there's a lot of complex AI initiatives? This is maybe not that relevant for smaller organizations. It's also consideration in another angle if smaller organizations can even support the proposal of the role. But larger organizations, certainly, they've got complex AI initiatives that's also paralleled in the orchestration requirements of AI implementation. So what's your opinion on this, Faisal? Is there an opportunity for single point of failure?
This role is not supposed to be the all in all and driving anything in a silo, then it failed, right? So the reason the broader stroke of innovation and transformation is because by definition, successful innovation and transformation has to be collaborative. Innovation and transformation doesn't succeed if you don't bring people together, not just from top-down alignment of purpose and goals and objective, but also a bottom-up participation, engagement, and collaboration. The very fact the role requires a converged discipline, meaning a discipline of human psychology, ethics driven by philosophy, technical skills, understanding of business models, organizational psychology, et cetera, they're supposed to play the orchestration role. And we often see the argument that CIOs needs to be the orchestrator, but the CEO are typically outside focused. And if you look at chief operating officers, they are very much focused on making sure that wheels are not coming off. In that context, this is the person who's supposed to be the glue that brings things together and singularly focused on driving a successful innovation and transformation by creating a slew of portfolio of opportunity. We can dive a little more about portfolio because of the fact that innovation and transformation is never just a singular destination, nor many of them are going to fail. So how are you going to rack and stack that?
So a couple of questions. Have you met in your life individuals where you would say you're certainly fit for that role? How many have you met in your life until now where you would say that person is an ideal CITO?
I would say that there are many people who are increasingly are very much equipped to do this because we collectively as an industry learned over the years, and even the traditional the CIO role or CTO role has evolved. No longer see most successful organizations are not like they used to call the CIO and CTOs the order takers, meaning the CEOs tell something or the business unit tells something, and CIO and CTOs play that role. And we have seen increasing argument that the seat at the table for the CIOs and CTOs. So so the makeup has been developed over the years. What needs to happen is not just so much do you have the skill set or not, is the organizational recognition that you need to have this, that somebody who's capable, not just capable, but also have the mandate and the power to make it happen and bring things together and pull it together, right? Somebody has to be singularly focused on innovation and transformation. It cannot be just all over the place.
Definitely. I suppose it also leads us on to thinking about there will be a natural inclination and also question around where the division of responsibilities do lie. You have highlighted, and we have spoken about this whole orchestration. They're the person that brings everything together, glues everything, motions the initiatives, etc. But also we understand from the complexity, and also that goes back to the human elements and the psychological sort of neurological instincts that we have as humans to sort of mark our own turf. Do you see any problems with traditional roles, chief innovation officers? You've got chief human resource officers who are also being called upon and mentioned in the article. Where do you see specific strategies and governance that will be required to be able to maintain those and calm those power struggles?
Yeah, look, many ways. If you say, okay, so where in this context, where does a CTO or a CIO fall? Maybe you don't have those roles anymore. Maybe they become chief architect and chief process officer, and they work for their CICTO role. You can call it whatever you want to call it. The real argument here is that just if you look at it, CEO focused on externally focused strategy and growth, and chief operating officers are focused on making sure those strategy and the mandates are being executed by the entire organization. And you see a head of marketing focusing on branding and head of sales or revenue officer is responsible for revenue generation. Here, a person needs to be pulling together where the innovation and transformation opportunities are. How do we govern those opportunities? And as a result, the organization not just focus on the next quarter's mandate, but what happens in 12 months, 36 months, 48 months, and even maybe 10 years from now, which is unpredictable. You cannot map out a 10-year plan, but you can create a cultural inertia that drives a 10-year growth pattern based on the purpose of the organization.
One thing that we always find ourselves talking about as well is this human element that is extremely important in this transformation. Not only the organizational transformation, but the transformation we're going through with the accompaniment and use of AI and the increasing sort of favorable necessity and desire for it. Also, that comes into how we measure success from the human side of AI transformation. It's not all about the stats, KPIs, about product usage, lack of churn, technical adoption. We also want to look at the sort of representative, reportable, which board of directors boards will ask for as well. How have you experienced that in conversation recently? Like, what sort of KPIs or OKRs are being used when we're talking about the human side of AI transformation?
Look, if we look at those two examples that we talked about as a failure, technically it was very successful in the sense that it reduced the operating expenses, all that, right? But it failed because it didn't focus on what's the impact on people that you're trying to serve and the people that you're trying to work. I wrote a piece on actually in Fast Company, and we covered this in other places, that we're measuring the success of AI wrongly. What I meant by that is that we need to focus on, is it really making a difference in terms of customer acquisition, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, cost, or is it just giving us more speed and quote unquote efficiency, but it's also alienating the people that we want to serve and the people we want to work with? So the measurement has to be the actual human impact. And I think more and more organizations are recognizing that, because with any kind of new technology, we all get enamored and we say, look how fast it can write, look how fast it can code, look how fast it can extract data from these vast data models. That's great, but then you have to ask, so what? Why does it matter? So we have to go back to this. Why does it matter? Just because we can, should we do it or not? So sometimes, if you look at that Canada Air example, if a passenger is in distress, it's probably not a good idea to have a chatbot deal with it and use that as an exception, have a human agent talk to that person, right? You cannot take away that emotional human element that plays a role. I also make this argument often, which is a very simple example. Just because you can replace all the servers and the cooks in the restaurant, should you do it? Because we don't go to restaurant just so that we can have a plate of food. We go to the restaurant to get a human experience by connecting with other people, right? So you can do that, but the question is, are you going to lose all your customers? Then if you lose all your customers, then as a business, you just failed.
That's a really great example. It's one that I do like talking about. So you've got this whole concept of AI persona, which you've just touched upon in the mention of the sort of failure of the implementation of that particular AI use case, the necessity for the emotional intelligence, essentially, and also that human touch. Do you think that if you're to look at the accountability within an organization, and it's something that I think about quite a lot, who's accountable for that in the AI persona? Like if we're talking about the introduction of the CITO, or if we even look at a sort of more well-defined and classical C-suite roles, whose responsibility is it?
This is why it is that role's responsibility to vet and to collaborate with other team members or others leadership members that's going to bring up these complex, tough questions about we can do this, but should we do it? And what will be the impact? And as a result, what's going to be the impact on the business? You asked a very salient question. Does it matter in a small versus large organization? It really doesn't matter. It's the same questions, right? Large organization is just harder to pull together because you need more process, because you have more people and you have more established culture and whatever. In a smaller organization, it's easier to do because you have less process, less bureaucracy, and less people, and you can talk to each other more freely. So there is a difference in terms of execution, whether you're a 100 people company versus 100,000 people company. But the basic fundamental notion and the concept and the philosophical tenet we're talking about in terms of organizational psychology and organizational makeup remains the same.
Do you think that there's any nuance from a geographical perspective? Like, do you see it being adopted in, well, we can give the example of like Silicon Valley, maybe not as representative, but also, do you see it being adopted in certain geographies more than others? Or is there no geographical sort of parallel there?
If you talk about geographical cultural elements, Silicon Valley is move fast, break all, and figure out later culture, right? You can argue whether that really works or not, and we have created lots of problems just adopting that mentality, right? Meaning it's not a technology company, but technology is heavily used, whether that's financial organization, government agencies, manufacturing organization, any of the Fortune 500 companies, they are more risk adverse, right? So it's more cautious, more deliberate, if I can use that term. And then if you look at, let's say, US versus Europe, you're based in Zurich, I'm here in New York, there's all sorts of regulation that EU is expanding on and deliberately trying to put some guardrail. US has no such guardrail in the context of AI implementation yet. That's to speak of, right? I mean, there are like government standards. In US, we have a thing called NIST, which is a standard for cybersecurity and AI implementation and a little bit of ethics and whatnot. But we don't have a legislative mandate what we should do and shouldn't do. So all that plays a role how each of those organizational type are approaching it. But I would say this, that any responsible organization who wants to implement responsible AI should be deeply concerned about human impact and societal impact and organizational impact.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you have to keep that at the forefront nowadays. It's all about the responsibility that comes with implementation and development of AI. So Faisal, I want to touch upon one sort of CTA and last question before we finish the conversation today. Let's say, hypothetically, an organization wasn't in a position to be able to bring in a CITO. And there could be an element where people might feel a little bit de-skilled, devalued, sidelined if they don't have a combination of technical, psychological, everything that comes with what we've spoken about, the angle of understanding the journey end to end and being able to put those pieces together. What can listeners do and take away, especially if they are in leadership positions, to be able to start to reskill, upskill, and empower their organization to move in a direction of this?
So it's a bit of a personal and organizational responsibility. So all I would say that if you are in the C-suite and you play a CIO role or CTO role, or there's also now chief AI officer, CDO, chief data officer. If you are very technical, focus on quote unquote soft skills, which shouldn't be called soft skills, but they are called soft skills, like emotional intelligence and leadership skills and that sort of a thing, right? Cognitive behavioral science and philosophy sort of skills. If you are a leader who's not very technically savvy, then start getting a core understanding of technology landscape and the application of technology. You don't need to be a technocrat to implement AI, but you do need to understand the implication, tech stack, and architecture, and that sort of a thing. So that's on the individual level. On the organizational level, if you are a CEO or if you're a chairman of the board, or let's say you're a chief operating officer, or if you're a chief human resource officer, recognizing that your organization needs somebody who can drive this, then look for somebody in the organization who is a visionary and out-of-box thinker and help them to get those skills where they lack. And it's really boils down to purpose-driven and vision-driven and a non-stop learner. This phrase that we often use, that learn, unlearn, and relearn, that mentality and philosophy needs to be embedded at an organizational level, but also on an individual level.
Yeah, great input. So I'd like to end the conversation today and thank you for joining us on Convergence. I'll take what Faisal has just said because it's extremely inspirational. So I'd like you to join us in this series, Convergence. It is a signature series and we're here to learn, unlearn and relearn. And we hope that you enjoy the journey. Thank you for listening today. You can follow us on Spotify and YouTube.
Thank you.
In this episode, we've only scratched the surface. What if the next big leap in AI changes not just technology, but who holds the power?